Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church, to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting.
Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Braaten, your host. Today we have with us a special guest from north of the border, Reverend Dr. Harold Ristau. He is professor at Concordia Lutheran Theological Seminary and St. Catherine's, Ontario, Canada. He is not only a professor there, but he is also a pastor in the Lutheran Church of Canada and has served as a military chaplain. So welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, Harold.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
So the reason I wanted to chat with you is, down here in the States, we've been hearing about the Freedom Convoy, and then even over the past 2 years with COVID, the number of difficulties that churches have gone through just in having services or having police show up and shut them down or even arrest them. I just kind of wanted to get a sense for what is going on in Canada and in terms of either harsh or even light persecution and how the rest of the church is dealing with it. And on top of that, your most recent involvement in, attending part of that Freedom Convoy to offer prayer and supplication for your nation. So what's going on?
Yeah. Well, again, I don't exactly know how much of the media coverage you're getting from Canada. The political culture in Canada is quite different than the U.S. You've got more checks and balances on the mainstream media. And you also have more checks and balances in the political system in the States, that arises from, your own history, whereas our history here, being a colony of Britain, was much more peaceful. So we're not really used to sort of not complying to the government or even questioning them or protesting even. Yeah. And I think that's the general reputation that Canada has, which is why this has really struck a chord with the international community, saying, well, if the Canadians, if 50% of the Canadians essentially support this convoy of freedom, there must be something to that. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Justin Trudeau, our present Prime Minister, has essentially used every opportunity he can think of to justify an absolute overreach of government involvement in family church and just generally in terms of our civil rights, which are protected under the Canadian Charter of Freedoms. So you have to understand that unlike America, we're much more on the left of center. Okay, so our conservatives, our Republicans, are conservatives, and they follow sort of the British system. So we're all more socialist over here, to put it short. Okay, and with that sort of socialism already comes this notion that the government can be involved in ways that you wouldn't expect them to be in for instance, in America. So what we've seen here in Canada over the last couple of years has been during the pandemic, not just the pandemic regulations, for instance, the lockdown of churches, and now not being able to attend church unless you're vaccinated, having bylaw officers remove the chalice, small cups only to be used, and recording attendance and names of people in churches and all those sorts of things. We've also had different laws that have come through, for instance, that a fairly recent one was Bill C-4, which deprived parents of the right to stop their children from having a sex change. So a child is now allowed to have a sex change without their parents' permission. for instance.
Isn't there a bill also that goes on to say that you can't have any even countermeasures? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, in the topic of the sex change. Right.
Yeah.
We call it conversion therapy. So the notion is that at the very least, if somebody wants to have a sex change, they should be fully informed. Okay. So if you're going to treat a child like an adult and say, well, they're a woman trapped in a man's body or whatever, well, at least talk about the physical or psychological consequences potentially of making those, major amendments to your body, right? So that was conversion therapy. Let's let both sides be told. Well, that was that's been shut down as hateful. We have another bill that had come in that. I think it was C-36 saying if you post anything on the internet that is contrary to the government narrative, that can be considered hateful and punishable by $70,000 fine and 4 years in prison. By virtue of my military involvement as a retired chaplain, I have a position as a liaison with all Lutheran chaplains in Canada and to the Canadian military. Recently, a hateful conduct policy coming through that if anyone disagrees with your religious beliefs or finds anything you believe to be offensive, that can be considered hateful conduct is another one that recently came through. So we've got various. They took charitable status away from any pro-life organizations that are trying to counsel people to reconsider their decision to have an abortion. We've got so they're basically saying, that's wrong to inform people on the physical, psychological consequences of having an abortion on the body, on the woman's body at the very least. So there's all these sort of implicit attacks on the church in that, churches that are pro-life, then, does that mean you take charitable status away from them so you don't get a tax receipt for donations? Churches that have issues with, homosexuality and so forth, is it going to be like in Finland? Where that's punishable. The Trudeau government, when the convoy originally started rolling into Ottawa, immediately accused the protesters of being anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, homophobic, some other phobias. And what was fascinating is the rhetoric continued to he continued to go on saying these are fringe minority Christians, mainly Christians. It's because an anti-Semite means you're not Jewish. Even there's a lot of Jews standing up with us. Islamophobic, boy, there's a lot of Muslim truckers. I'll tell you, standing up with it, And when I was at protest in Toronto, I was beside a black guy. Who was saying, "Hey, Father, can you believe it that I was called a white supremacist? Look at my skin color." And I said, well, what did the guy say? When you rebuked him, and he said, "You don't have to be black to be a white. You don't have to be white to be a white supremacist." He said, and I said, "Yeah, that's woke. That's woke culture for you. You can be anything you want, right?" And this guy wasn't religious, right? So there's been an absolute antagonism and demonizing and writing a narrative about the convoy, the Freedom Convoy thing that is associating it with sort of a right-wing Christian movement. And Trudeau has been vocally opposed to the church since he's been in serving as prime minister. One final just example of that being back in the summer, we had issues with the Aboriginals, residential school issues and so forth. And it resulted in, it was somewhere between 30 and 50 churches were burnt down. Okay. Terrorist attack on churches. When asked, and by the way, it was mainly not natives. It was the woke types, the liberals that, I just want to cause trouble. Most of the natives, the Aboriginals, are Roman Catholic, and are quite pious and so forth. And by the way, the leader of the convoys is a Métis. She's actually half Aboriginal. But anyway, she what he actually said when the media asked him to finally respond to these burning of churches, while he was meeting with some forum with Islamic representatives, and he was the same week, it was something with the synagogues. He said, this is what he said. He said, the burning down of the churches is understandable. Punkt. Okay? There was no political sort of couching saying, it's understandable, but my heart still goes out to all those elderly people who have lost their places of worship, and we should never resort to violence to express our dissent, and all these sorts of things. That was it. That's all he had to say. And two of those, Jason, weren't even aboriginally. They weren't even connected with the Aboriginal movement. So we're wondering who burnt down those two. So absolute terrorist attacks and violent episodes that were never addressed, and again this sort of implicit attack upon the church. So back to the convoy.
Yeah.
Well, the convoy has been a peaceful movement.
Before
3 or 4 weeks ago. Yes,
get into that. I just have to say that, like, the convoy in our house, like, my wife checks on those trucks. She calls her my truckers. I got to check on my truckers tonight to see how they're doing. So in our house, in the Braaten household, the convoy is, they're in our prayers, and we're just rooting for them. So we just love seeing it. So
beautiful.
Yeah. To the convoy.
Thank her for me.
Thank
her for me. There are many that will be horrified that I'm standing up for the convoys. Partially because they're believing the mainstream media narrative, which is absolutely antagonizing and demonizing these guys. Even the own mainstream media is essentially saying the only illegalities that are occurring are traffic violations because they're parked illegally, thousands of trucks in downtown Ottawa, and noise pollution, which they've cut out. I mean, the only acts of violence outside of crazy people that attend big public events that do stupid things that should be arrested, like at a football game or something, some intoxicated person that gets arrested.
Yeah.
The only acts of violence was one in Winnipeg where an Antifa, basically a terrorist who our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, had even given money to, the Antifa movement, went into a crowd in Winnipeg with his car, and he injured 4 people, and I think hospitalized at least one. The guy was a terrorist, and he was let go with some bad driving, careless driving the same day instead of attempt on manslaughter. Another was they put in a law in Ottawa saying you can't honk horns anymore, and everybody's obeyed it as soon as it was put in. And one guy, an old man, he was 70 years old, tooted his horn, deet, deet, and the cops ripped him out of his car, bruised him, and I think it was sort of like a handicapped guy when you look at the footage, and they dragged him away.
Yeah,
those are the only 2 acts of violence, and they were basically the counter side. Because I can tell you something, Jason, if there was actually another act of violence from the protesters, it would be all over the newspapers.
Yes, yeah.
And you haven't seen it even in mainstream media. So these guys have rolled over from the States, Canadians, but supported also by the States, in the sense that they don't want to have to be vaccinated, injected, to do their jobs, and it's become a Charter of Rights and Freedom issue, because we don't want to be forced to be injected for different reasons, whether it be bodily integrity, whether it be the science that has been muzzled for quite some time now that is coming out. That there's the pharmaceuticals haven't been fully truthful with us. Whoa, big surprise. So that, or it could be in my case, the abortive technology argument.
Yeah.
In terms of saying the mRNA vax, it has a connection to the murder of the unborn, and you can use the remote distance of evil argument, but you can't just. Our synodical president, Harrison, can't just say, Well, you don't have to feel bad about that because in the 1970s was so far away that everyone agrees that remote participation in evil doesn't count in this case. Well, last I looked in the Bible, we're still confessing for sins that we did in the Garden of Eden, aren't we, Jason?
Yes.
So it's a lot further away in time than the 70s, for goodness sake. So now I'm not going to harp on the vaccination and whether it's justifiable or not. I'm just saying, we're saying, you can't tell us we have to. You can't tell us we have to take this and make us feel like we're not good citizens if we don't, or punish us, or imprison us, or stop us from going to church. So this is why these convoys have now, because our prime minister wouldn't negotiate with them. They warned him a week ahead they were coming in. They're ex police officers, ex military, ex intelligence. It's so peaceful because there's brains behind it. It's well organized. Yeah. They've said this is what we're doing as a protest, where it's within our rights to protest and so forth. And Justin Trudeau has taken this position that he won't negotiate with terrorists. He hasn't used the word terrorist, but that's why he hasn't spoken with them. He still hasn't. And since that has happened, this has captured the imagination of Canadians, saying, that Trudeau figure, this is iconic of the abuse and overstep of government on all these other matters too. Yeah. And so this idea that, well, what do these convoy people actually want? It's like, well, they actually just want the government to obey the law. And it's not even good enough that, it's not even good enough if the prime minister would resign, because his sidekick, she's with the World Economic Forum, and she's actually smarter than Justin, and even more feisty. So it's not a question of switching people out; it's about keeping people accountable. Yeah. The last living writer of the Charter of Rights and Freedom, that's our Constitution in your language, okay? He's living. He's on the side of the Convoy of Freedom. He's one of the main speakers, and he's horrified by the fact that no mainstream media, since the beginning, has been willing to interview him as he lays down the law, saying this is an absolute a violation of the charter, the mandates, but at the very least, the question of the obliged vaccination. So that's to give you a little bit of the paint the picture a little bit for you as why Canadians are so frustrated. They're not frustrated because COVID's been long and everyone's tired and boo-hoo, I can't see my family and have Christmas together. And no, give us some more credit than that. I mean, the Canadians are sick of the lack of transparency and the bullying, and not having the science and the information behind it. And again, not being able to lean on the Charter of Rights, which was created to protect the minority from the majority. That's what it was. That was why it was created. It wasn't the Constitution isn't there to protect the majority from each other when they all agree. Yeah, you know that.
Well, it's sort of like at least in the States, some of our arguments have been, well, we just want you to do what you said you were going to do, which is in the documents. We just want you to do what is right, what everyone knows is right.
That's absolutely perfect. Yes. I mean, it's common sense. When I've written to the MPs, all our politicians and my family and so forth, that's all we're saying. We're saying you guys know this to be true intuitively. When I was in Ottawa last weekend, I went up to the clusters of the officers because most of the officers in military are resonating with the convoy. That's why this tyrant, frankly, Justin Trudeau, I couldn't get the military behind him when he wanted to stick him on him in the first place. Is the military refuses? You can't make people go against their conscience and hope that they do well psychologically or spiritually down the road, if you know what I mean. That's the nice formula for PTSD, which used to be called moral injury, and then it was called spiritual injury. So
even so he couldn't get of our church, right? To go against conscience is neither good nor right.
This is what the president of our seminary, mentioned early on in the debates. He had said conscience alone should be enough to make us as a church unite against the mandates. That being said, one must always qualify that conscience. You could have a misinformed conscience.
Yes.
But this isn't the case here. I mean, right. This isn't about a crazy guy who's a psychopath because he doesn't have a developed conscience. Okay. I mean, the church is certainly divided over this, whether they want to be forthcoming with that or not. So when I was in Ottawa last weekend, I mean, I was going up to these police officers who were in their anti-terrorist gear, and there's children with strollers around. There's hugs everywhere. There's old people. I mean, it really is, as you hear, this party, and not a rowdy party, but like this. This is bizarre. It's just this sort of quite tame conservative version of a love feast, a love fest. It's go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Quite the juxtaposition to have that kind of protest, and then you have all of this riot gear.
Well, right. And so I said to the police officer, I said, officers, I want to thank you guys for being here. And I said, just so you know, we all get this, that you've got a corrupt police chief and you've got some elites in the background making you do stuff you don't actually want to do. I don't know how this is all going to pan out, but I want you guys to know that we get that. We get the moral dilemma you're in. And, tears in the eyes, Jason, nods, the old guys, nods of the heads, little smiles, there's a few hard-faced, some stone-faced sort of haters, but insecure officers who just want to put on the show, but the ones that know something, they get it. So we've got more and more military and even police officers coming out, losing their pensions and everything because they're saying we're seeing what's going on behind the scenes. And when I went up there, it was actually coincided with that happening, with military stepping out because of their convictions. So the Trudeau then just yesterday put in place what's called the War Measures Act, or the Emergency Measures Act, which was used once in our history in the 1970s during what was called the October Crisis, where his father, Pierre Trudeau, was actually fighting against separatist terrorists from Quebec who had actually murdered people and taking people as hostage. So for the first time in history, they put those measures in place to reestablish order, and nobody's ever disputed that. Everybody was behind it except for the actual terrorists. This is not that, Jason. This is a peaceful protest where even on the borders where they've blocked traffic and cost millions, our prime minister's cost us millions every day of the last 2 years, and don't get me started on all the corruption in criminal activity he's gotten away with, frankly. But all these truckers have clearly put out the message that if you want to arrest us, we'll go peacefully. But what's clearly been going on, arguably, I guess, let's say arguably, is attempts to incite violence amongst the truckers. So there's an excuse.
We've been through that.
Well, yeah. So we've got guys saying, hey, trucker, you've been sweating in your truck for 2 weeks and you're all tired and grumpy. What do you think if the government comes and takes your kids away because they're saying they're going to do that tomorrow if you don't leave by midnight? And then they'll get them on camera going, are you telling me they're coming and taking them, yada, 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 right? And there's all these wild, crazy truckers. And then even in my own situation, I was interviewed there on Parliament in front of this war memorial. And I didn't actually see the interview, but I heard it was decent. But they try to cut and paste to make you spin it to make you look like a radical or whatever. But even there, we had a memorial that was a war memorial. Okay, Great Wars Memorial, and they put a fence around it. The government put a fence around it to keep people off of it. Well, this fence was quite quite symbolic, because the justification for it was, oh, well, these right-wing Christian homophobes, violent people were dancing. We have a picture of one dancing on the statue or whatever, which isn't right, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Any day I used to live in Ottawa. Any day in the summer, you have people sitting on the monuments. You got people urinating on them. You got homeless people eating on them. You get the tourists climbing up and taking
Mm-hmm.
pictures. That's just how it goes. You've got 2 million or 1.2 million for the first week there, and then it was double the next week.
Mm-hmm.
Over there, protesting. You're going to expect something like that to happen. So what did they do is put this fence around it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was there last Saturday, in my veteran gear, because I've served overseas now 4 times, chaplain veteran. All these veterans standing around, and they did take this fence down. But Jason, they did it in the most orderly, professional way. You would bring tears to your eyes just watching these guys take this thing down. It was like our version, a mini version of the Berlin Wall, but it's the Canadian way. It's all everyone's polite. They all take each rock down carefully. Excuse me, ma'am, do you mind stepping to the side? We're going to lay them all out here. Officer, do you mind just making sure nobody cuts themselves on the edges of this? Yes, no problem. Like it's that kind of a climate, right? They clean off all the snow on the monument that had accumulated there. They chip away all the ice. There's thousands of flowers are thrown onto this onto the monument, and then I get a veteran. A veteran says, "We got a chaplain here with us," and he says, "Chaplain, would you do a service for us?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure if I want to use the word service. I'm not quite ready to unpack that according to my confessions and so forth. But I said I will pray." They said, "That's terrific." So he says, "Everybody steady up." He said, "Chaplain's coming up. We're going to pray. Hats off." And thousands of people take their hats off. I stand up there, say the Apostles' Creed, begin with the invocation, do the Lord, do a prayer in which I pray for peace, unity, love, and yes, repentance for any abuses from our government elected officials, especially our Prime Minister, and yet that God would have mercy. Then we prayed the Lord's Prayer together. When was the last time in a public space in this country of Canada we've had the Lord's Prayer uttered, even though the monotheistic religions are actually pretty fine with that, And then I concluded with the Aaronic benediction from Numbers, right? And a good sort of ecumenical chaplain prayer in a sense, because, everybody likes Old Testament material, you've got, you're basically capturing everyone. It wasn't some Billy Graham, evangelical, that kind of a prayer. It was tasteful, recognizing that the spectrum of diversity that was there. Even homo flags flying around, which obviously I can't stand. But I mean, even that, tolerating the prayers, and then we end with "O Canada," and we sing the original version, the non-woke version, and everyone proudly sings this. And then after that's done, it was like that should have been itself like this. Moment in Canadian history of pride and joy and unity. Well, there's barely anything you can find on the net, on that. I wonder why. And then they interviewed me shortly thereafter, where I say, as a veteran chaplain, this is the first. I haven't been proud to have served my country overseas for almost 2 years now. When those truckers rolled into to Ottawa, I put my poppy. That's a Canadian symbol for patriotism.
Sure.
Back on, and I put my flag up. When they did that, this is what Canada's about. I've done death notifications for. I've never counted how many fallen comrades who fought for freedom in other countries, and here we are, just asserting our freedoms. Not fighting, just asserting our freedoms. There's no fighting going on. Just asserting our freedoms in Canada, and we're the terrorists. So I pointed to the reporter. I'm like, "Here's my medals. I'm a terrorist. These guys, these weeping veterans, who are saying, we've lost our families and lives, and we're wounded, and this and that, and we're not allowed to be here at our at our monument, we're being demonized. So this demonization and this sort of depriving people of their humanity. I mean, the mayor of Ottawa actually forbade porta potties to be put on the place because they were trying to basically starve these guys out. I mean, what kind of a dehumanizing? I mean, Washington D.C. when there's protests, people are civil to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, to say, so they had a pass. They had they done everything orderly to get everything equipped so that the protests could go on, and then the government people sabotaged it. The police and the police under the the city of Ottawa or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really quite nasty. But these truckers, they behaved. They cut the music off before 8:00. They stopped their honking. Now they've moved their trucks out of residential areas into the center of Ottawa, which is militaristically a very unwise strategic move. When you move yourselves, cluster yourself closer together. But they're saying we want the world to know that we're not trying to cause any disruption. We just want nobody to punish us anymore for not taking the vaccine. We just want you guys to obey the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and let us get on with our lives. And frankly, I mean, this might be the hill that we die on because of the War Measures Act right now. Basically, it's not clear what it means, but it could mean that any support to the truckers is an act of terrorism. So they've already shut down any funds. The banks are going after anyone who's giving money out to truckers in any way, shape, or form. If you bring cash and you give them out, that could be a terrorist activity. If you stand there with a sign, that could be even waving the flag could actually be, because the flag now means convoy freedom in our minds. You see. Yeah. In 50% of the Canadian population mind, essentially this means convoy freedom, if you believe the polls. Yeah. And Trudeau has a 16% poll popularity rate right now. So that's where where he's at. So we're not even sure what it means to put the War Measures Act out, formally War Measures Act. But goodness sake, people may accuse us of conspiracy theorism. Yeah. But, we do believe as Christians in conspiracies. I mean, we believe in spiritual conspiracies. Yep. We believe the Masons are up to no good. We believe that the media doesn't have our best interests in mind. What I mean? But it's pretty hard not to believe that there's something bigger going on in terms of an absolute invasion of Canadian freedoms.
Yeah. Well, there is this sense in which you have, the people in power saying this is what is true, this is what is true. And, as Christians, we're only given two sources of truth, right? Natural law, and that can only get you so far, and the Word of God. Mm-hmm. And because we are relying on those two sources of truth, we're the crazy ones.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And the problem is in Lutheran circles is you'd think that even in Lutheran circles you're the crazy ones, because Romans 13 gets thrown at you constantly, which is this idea that just blindly comply to abusive authorities. Well, is it abusive for a government to say you've got to now close the door of your church, or you can't invite friends to church, or you can't have Christmas services, even if you or you can only have 10% of your congregation is allowed to worship. Yeah, that you can't use the chalice. I mean, the moment we change something up liturgically, we have changed things permanently. Look at the introduction of the small cups, for instance. So I mean, our seminary at the very beginning was quite critical of any mandates. The government was saying, apparently, it's always unclear as to what is law around here in Canada, but most of our churches stopped singing, even though the Bible says sing. You can't get away from the Psalms. You can't call it adiaphora. You can't just say, oh, well, it's a cosmetic addition. It just God and his holy angels just think it sounds nicer when it's sung from his people. Singing is part of what it means to be a human, redeemed creature of God. It's part of how we've been hardwired as children of God.
It's how we're to comfort each other. Ephesians, and it's even imperative.
Absolutely, it's imperative. So when the government says you can't do that, really, it's Romans 13. What about obey God rather than man? We haven't heard a lot about that in our church over here. To further things with Luther, you get the whole, peasants' revolt argument. Well, Luther, said, look at Luther. He hates any kind of dissent. But then you've also got Magdeburg, where he's saying that the lower magistrate has a right to basically, quote unquote, revolt against the higher magistrate if he oversteps his overreaches into the life of the church.
Yeah,
Jason, I get so much criticism for publicly speaking this way, and I'm going to get way more after people hear this interview, okay? But nobody has actually rebuked me on anything I've written or said other than, oh, your tone is a little harsh, or you're too assertive, or you're saying it too often. That's all I've been rebuked of. And it's always been Canadians. I don't think any American has said anything but compliments to stuff that they've seen me write or whatever. So in our church, there's this sort of, at least in the Canadian culture, there's this real allergy towards distrusting alleged authorities. I mean, real authorities in terms of government, but also, somebody who's a medical authority. Look, we've got a debate amongst the experts, quote unquote. Well, there's a lot of experts that are losing their jobs that are dissed in the mainstream media. They're not getting a fair hearing. So you get Lutheran clergy going, well, I read the news and I can siphon through all that. And it's like, well, oh, really? You're objectively approaching the news. You're reading all the news out there, and I mean, you don't recognize how much you're influenced by the news.
Yeah.
In Canada, our main news corporation, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBC, it's a government asset created in the 1960s to unify the country. The Liberal government created this thing, so that's the loose equivalent to the Democrats, though much more left-ish. Okay. Created basically as a propaganda for a liberal agenda.
Yeah,
they have a $700 million annual budget. Look at our population, and you do the math per how much. And Trudeau gave them a raise this year, and he said publicly, in a joking way, but it was absolutely public, that's why they don't criticize him nor the mainstream media, because he also gave, before the last election in the fall, money to virtually every magazine, fishing, fashion, every magazine and newspaper and Canada virtually gave them something with a kind of wink that, don't say anything negative about us. And the ones that didn't give in, some of the Christian media, like True North, one's called True North, or it's not Christian, but didn't take the bribes. Rebel News is another one. Yeah. He's actually deliberately gone after these guys for giving the other narrative, another narrative. So that the main source of news in Canada, CBC, is basically it's a machine to. I mean, there's good music, there's good programming, but in terms of the news, it's partisan, clearly partisan. Prior to the pandemic, the Lutherans in Canada were saying, "Oh yeah, the media, they're all like anti-Christian, and oh yeah, they're woke, they're against the church. Oh, the big pharmas, oh yeah, we all know they're corrupt, and and then guess what happens, Jason? COVID hits, and all of a sudden it's like the big pharmas and the mainstream media, now they're all neutral and they're good, and you got to believe everything they've got to say, and you can't criticize them. Now the experts are, you can't criticize. So the fear mongering everyone just sort of caved into it. Yeah. In the Canadian context.
So, one of the things that you see in history when the church goes through persecution is that in the aftermath, when the persecution is over, there's a ton of fallout among the church itself, pointing fingers. Are you guys seeing some of that? I mean, I know you're still in the thick of it, but are you already still seeing now kind of the pointing fingers? It kind of sounds like you are. And how are you guys navigating that?
Well, there hasn't. When you say the fallout, I mean, we're still. Quebec and Ontario and Canada have been the most highly mandated and COVID pandemoniac places in the world, arguably. Okay, so we're still there.
You're still in
so
it.
Like my kids, I mean, as I look outside my window, people just wear masks as they're walking. The majority of people are masked up when they're walking. You can't walk into a Costco without wearing a mask. And if you slip it underneath your nose, they've got security that come and get you. We've got, in our churches, we still have churches that are not open. Jason, I've got churches here near my seminary that have not yet opened. They're so afraid of COVID. I still am told that by you not getting vaccinated, you're killing people. That's Fifth Commandment. You're murdering people. That's the climate. So there's still this absolute fear. Spiritually, the devil's just having a field day. I mean, the Lord's always in control, but I mean, people have already, they distrust that divine service is actually divine because they're wondering if their neighbor might poison them. They're wondering if their pastor might, breathe into the shooter glass and kill them with COVID. And you look at the stats. We all know, we all know how laughable the COVID death stats are still. And all that, right? But there's that climate of no, we are actually still in this dangerous plague.
Okay.
And so the pointing of fingers hasn't come yet in terms of, who messed this whole thing up. My church has, has really said nothing strong. And the only thing recently that was disappointing is we had a clergy member who had prayers, had prepared some prayers praying for the convoy of freedom in a way that it was even prefaced saying, you can amend these prayers however you want. I've tried to be kind of, neutral, I don't know what the word would be. God, may there be no violence, may these people be heard through this legitimate means of voicing concerns. God, if you want us to continue to be disciplined by the COVID and all those sorts of things, may we accept that and still stand firm in the faith. Like beautiful prayers that were posted on some of our synodical rezos, like our synodical channels of communication, I guess. And then they were taken down a few days later. And then I inquired a couple of times as to why that was the case and won't receive a response. We're just saying pray. If you want to pray that these terrorists go home, I have more respect for that than say nothing. You're accountable before God for saying that and in teaching your people these things. But at least do something or say something. Our church hasn't really said anything. And not just on this issue, Jason, but I mean, Bill C-4 on conversion therapy. I mean, we're against homosexuality. That's clear. We can find that on our websites. But in terms of being a relevant voice in the left-hand kingdom, like Luther rebuking the prince when he needed to be rebuked.
Yes.
We're not doing that. So what I'm finding in terms of people supporting me, it's not the boomers. It's the young people. That's terrific. I got young people going. I want to come back to church.
Yeah.
Because here we've got the church has finally said something.
Yeah.
So I mean, when I was standing on in Parliament Hill speaking, I wasn't speaking as a seminary professor or something like that. I mean, though I am one, I was speaking as a veteran. But there's nothing that that I would say there that I wouldn't say in any public space. And if you really don't like it, well, then let's talk. Let's debate, let's dialogue, let's foster, cultivate a climate where we can let the truth set us free, not in the Jesus sense of salvation, but just generally, like John the Baptizer, right?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't die directly for his faith. He died for the corollary of his faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
He died for truth. He was calling out immorality,
yeah,
right? He was calling out lies. He was calling out abuse, and we consider him a martyr. So being Lutheran isn't just about, well, if somebody comes up to some guy comes up to me with a gun to my head and asks me, well, do I believe in Jesus or not? That's the critical moment where I die for my faith or not. I got to make a decision, and everything else, well, I can just freely just not do anything. As Christians, we're compelled to speak politically. So my question to people that criticize me standing there is, why aren't you standing there with me, for goodness sake?
Yeah.
Why aren't you saying something? And I said that to the media. I said, why is Justin Trudeau not standing here answering us, or standing celebrating with us unity and love, okay, and what it means to be Canadian, Mm-hmm. So I don't think the onus is on me to explain, why I didn't get injected, or why I don't want to give up my chartered rights, or why I speak out publicly in a political forum as a pastor. I think the onus is on people that disagree with me to explain their position.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. So I know you have to run in a few minutes, but how can we help? I mean, can we do anything? What can we do to help you?
Well, obviously, if I don't say pray, I look unpious, right? So I want to pray, and continue to worship and love. Though, I tell my kids some days, I get angry in my heart and I say things I shouldn't have said, and I say, kids, forgive me. Don't model that part of dad.
Yeah.
And Lord, and they know, Lord, may we love our enemies. If we don't love our enemies, then the devil's already won. Mm-hmm. No matter if we get taken over by an evil regime, so what? But if we haven't loved our enemies and we've sinned in our heart that way, that's an issue. So love those who do poorly on both sides of the border. But I think mostly, because I know you guys have this echoing over to America, and you've got your version of Trudeau there with Biden. Okay, I know all that. But to get into see what's really happening here in Canada. Don't just watch the mainstream media. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's been some really fishy things going on, even amongst our RCMP, like our federal police. Okay, some really fishy things. See the other narrative. Rebel News is a really good one. True North, something like True North is one. There's a couple you could get on a Convoy Freedom page and see things, and then you can make your own decision, because you guys aren't as gullible as us over here in Canada, frankly. Okay, we're really, there's a fine line between apathy here and nice Canadians and just being kind of gullible. Okay, so it works in both ways. So that would be my advice to you, and then write and speak out. But please help us out here. Talking to Harold Sankbell, my good friend, the other day, he wanted to zoom in because he was horrified by what he was hearing going on in the news, and mm-hmm. he'd said, well, the mainstream isn't saying that, but I'm seeing what's really going on, and he said the same thing, and I said, get the word out there that this is a really critical times in Canada for the church, but also for just as brotherly love, that we don't want to be taken over by tyrannical governments. I mean, is that on Lutheran, Jason, to say that, we don't want to be ruled by a tyrant? Like, that's not liberation theology, is it?
No,
is that social
not.
gospel? I don't want to, that I don't want my kids to not be able to go to church because there's a tyrant not letting them. I mean, I want to be remembered in history being 1930s Germany. I mean, look at all the post-war guilt of people that just complied mm-hmm. and did nothing, But again, we're not talking about, Che Guevara and taking up arms, and none of that, not one hint of that has happened.
Yeah, there are so many other means. And, Edmund Burke said it pretty well, for evil to prevail, good men need to do nothing. And, as you said, one of the things we can do is pray, but certainly by being informed, as well as actually, standing watch, as St. Paul tells us to do in Ephesians, and standing our ground and then stating what we're actually seeing with our eyes, right? And not being convinced by the god of Hermes from Zeus that we're the crazy ones. We've seen it with our own eyes.
That's. I mean, the difference with the convoy politically is that in the past, seeing with your own eyes meant the media was there with the people. Mm-hmm. Okay, so not to get into Vietnamese, the war in Vietnam, but it was the media that was publicizing things. Okay, the Berlin Wall, the media, right? Mm-hmm. Here, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
So the eyewitness accounts really have to be people coming to Ottawa or going to meet the truckers at the borders. Well, again, it looks like the government's trying to close that off. They're trying to say, well, a tourist going into Ottawa and meeting with truckers is going to be an act of terrorism. I mean, that's how you shut down, they've already tried to shut down the cameras and put them back on in Ottawa because they didn't want people to see what they had planned. Mm-hmm. So yes, the eyewitness stuff is hugely important, but also just recognize that people are selfish and malicious, and when you're hearing a story like, again, peaceful Canadians have all just sort of lost it and they're revolting against the government, you've got to realize something doesn't jive. I mean, logically with that, So be suspicious in a holy way, and write your governments like we're all in this together. I mean, your church is my church, right? My church is yours. I used to be Missouri Synod before I had a call in Missouri Synod for 5 years. So I mean, I was brought up in a Missouri Synod church, So we're in this together, brother. So
yes.
But
well, Harold, thank you for your time, and you will definitely be in our prayers. You already are in the prayers of our household. And know that at least the Gottesdienst crowd is standing with you and behind you. And if there's anything you need, just give us a call.
Well said. Thank you. And we pray for that. We've prayed the Orthodox gospel continues. Orthodox Lutheran gospel continues through all the amazing work you guys do at Gottesdienst. I'm a big fan.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right. God bless you.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.